The Supreme Court is once again at the center of America's gun debate, stepping into a legal and cultural battleground that has divided the nation for decades. This time, the justices are focusing on a crucial question. Where exactly can firearms be carried on private property that's open to the public, such as stores, restaurants, and entertainment venues? On October 3, 2025, the court agreed to hear Wolford v. Lopez, a case with the potential to reshape the landscape of gun rights in America. The outcome could affect how people interact in everyday places like shopping centers, restaurants, and cinemas, where millions gather daily. At the heart of the case is a fundamental question. Does the Second Amendment guarantee the right to carry guns onto private land used for public commerce? Or do property owners have the power to set their own rules and decide who can bring firearms onto their premises? This case comes on the heels of recent Supreme Court decisions that expanded gun rights, forcing states and local governments to rethink and sometimes rewrite their regulations to comply with new legal standards. The outcome could either further broaden the right to carry firearms in public spaces, making it harder for property owners to restrict guns, or it could affirm the authority of property owners and state governments to restrict or even ban firearms in the places where Americans shop, eat, and gather. Millions of Americans, gun owners, business owners, and lawmakers alike, are watching closely, knowing that the court's decision will shape not just legal doctrine, but the daily reality of life in communities across the country. As arguments approach, the nation waits with anticipation to see how the Supreme Court will balance the right to bear arms with the rights of property owners, setting a precedent that could echo through the heart of American commerce for years to come. At issue is a 2023 Hawaii law requiring gun owners to get explicit permission before bringing firearms onto private property open to the public. Unlike most states, where guns are allowed unless a business posts a ban, Hawaii's law flips the script. Guns are banned unless the owner opts in. Lawmakers say this protects property rights and public safety, especially after the Supreme Court's Bruin decision made it easier to get carry permits. Critics argue the law creates a confusing patchwork, making it nearly impossible for gun owners to carry for self-defense in daily life. The law covers nearly all commercial spaces, shops, restaurants, parking lots, unless the owner gives affirmative consent. The Supreme Court is reviewing only this provision, not Hawaii's separate bans on guns in sensitive places like schools or government buildings. The outcome will determine if states can default to banning guns in public-facing private businesses. The stakes, a new national standard for where Americans can legally carry firearms. 3 Hawaii gun owners, along with a prominent gun rights group, are taking their fight to court, challenging a controversial new law that restricts where firearms can be carried in public spaces. They argue the law effectively guts the Second Amendment right to carry for self-defense, making it nearly impossible for ordinary citizens to legally protect themselves outside their homes. According to the plaintiffs, a right that can't be exercised in most places people go, like stores, restaurants, or even sidewalks, isn't a real right at all, but an illusion. Their legal argument hinges on the Supreme Court's Bruin test, which says that modern gun laws must align with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. The challengers claim there's no historical precedent for requiring explicit permission to carry in public businesses, especially from the founding era, when carrying arms was seen as a basic right. They argue Hawaii's law is a modern invention, not rooted in the country's legal history, and therefore should be considered unconstitutional under the Supreme Court's own standards. The lawsuit frames the law as an infringement on individual rights, not simply a protection of private property or business interests, raising questions about the balance between public safety and constitutional freedoms. The case gained national momentum after a rare brief from the U.S. Solicitor General, who argued that the lower court misapplied the Bruin standard and failed to properly consider the Supreme Court's guidance. At its core, the challenge asks the Supreme Court to clarify its own test and potentially strike down what gun owners see as a backdoor gun ban that could set a precedent for other states. The outcome could reset the boundaries of the Second Amendment in public life, shaping how Americans exercise their rights for years to come. Supporters of Hawaii's law say it's about property rights. At its core, the law is designed to give business owners and private citizens more control over their own spaces. They believe business owners shouldn't be forced to allow guns if they don't want them, and that the law protects their freedom to set their own rules. Supporters argue the law empowers owners to decide what's best for their employees and customers, giving them a clear say in their own safety policies. They also say it helps keep public spaces safe by requiring conscious consent for firearms, rather than allowing guns by default in every business. The Ninth Circuit agreed, ruling that the Second Amendment doesn't override a property owner's right to exclude guns from their premises, and that the law strikes a balance between individual rights and public safety, but opponents counter that the law is a veiled attempt to ban guns in most public places, making it nearly impossible for law-abiding citizens to carry for self-defense. They argue that, historically, people could carry weapons in public accommodations like inns and markets, and that the right to bear arms was recognized in these spaces for centuries. Opponents say Hawaii's law breaks with that tradition, setting a new and restrictive precedent. Critics also say the law is unworkable. Navigating a patchwork of permissions is confusing and impractical for everyday people. Getting permission from every business is a near impossible burden, especially in busy areas with dozens of shops and restaurants. They prefer the traditional approach, where businesses post signs if they want to ban guns, making the rules clear and simple for everyone. Opponents argue that requiring gun owners to seek permission everywhere is not only burdensome, but also creates confusion and potential legal risks. Ultimately, the debate boils down to whether the state can delegate the power to restrict a constitutional right to millions of individual property owners, or if that power should remain more limited and clearly defined. The roots of Woolford v. Lopez trace back to the Supreme Court's 2022 Bruin decision, which struck down New York's strict carry permit law. Bruin established that the right to bear arms extends beyond the home and said a new test gun laws must match the nation's historical tradition. This history-focused standard forced states to rewrite their laws, looking for ways to regulate guns that might survive court scrutiny. Hawaii's permission law is one such response, using property rights to limit where guns can be carried. Woolford v. Lopez is the first big test of these post-Bruin strategies. The Supreme Court must now clarify how strictly to apply its own historical test. Should only founding-era laws count, or can later traditions like property rights matter too? The answer will guide lower courts and shape the future of gun regulation nationwide. The outcome will be a blueprint for how states can or can't regulate guns after Bruin. The Supreme Court's ruling won't just affect Hawaii, it could reshape gun laws in states like California, New York, New Jersey, and Maryland, which have similar rules. If Hawaii's law falls, these states would likely have to scrap their default bans, making it easier to carry guns in public businesses nationwide. A ruling upholding Hawaii's law would greenlight more states to adopt similar restrictions, curbing where guns can be carried. The decision will either standardize gun rights in commercial spaces or deepen the patchwork of state-by-state rules. For businesses, it clarifies their rights and responsibilities. For gun owners, it defines where they can legally carry. For lawmakers, it sets the boundaries for future gun control efforts. The Supreme Court's focus on Hawaii comes as gun laws are being challenged nationwide. In Pennsylvania, Philadelphia's unique open carry law is under fire for treating city residents differently than those in the rest of the state. Conflicting court rulings have created chaos, prompting the state Supreme Court to step in. The debate mirrors the national divide. Should restrictions be eliminated for uniformity, or expanded for safety? Meanwhile, a recent Supreme Court decision upheld a federal gun ban for those under domestic violence restraining orders, even without a direct historical twin. This suggests the court may allow some flexibility in applying the Bruin test, using analogies rather than exact matches. Hawaii may argue its law is analogous to historical traditions of property owners, excluding those they deem dangerous. These cases show the ongoing struggle to define the limits of gun rights in modern America. The Supreme Court's decision in Woolford v. Lopez will have sweeping consequences. If the law is struck down, Gun owners could carry in most businesses unless owners post signs banning firearms, invalidating similar laws in other states. Business owners would have to take active steps to keep guns out, and states would lose a key tool for gun control. If the law is upheld, states could default to banning guns in commercial spaces, making it much harder to carry for self-defense. The ruling will define the balance between the Second Amendment and property rights, shaping gun regulation for years to come. For citizens, it will determine whether carrying a gun is practical or nearly impossible in daily life. The decision will set the rules for where Americans can carry guns in public. One way or another, the court's ruling will directly impact millions of Americans and the future of gun rights in the U.S.